The hospital corridor was a sterile, blinding white. The air smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. I sat on a hard plastic chair outside my daughter's room, listening to the rhythmic, unsteady beep of the heart monitor. It was a sound that had been the soundtrack to my life for 6 years. My daughter, Lily, was born with a heart that was beautifully, tragically flawed. We had known since she was a baby that this day would come. A day when a team of surgeons would hold her tiny, precious heart in their hands and try to mend it. Today was that day. The surgeon, a kind woman with tired eyes, had just left. "Everything is ready, Kate," she had said, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "She's a strong little fighter. We'll take good care of her. The finance office just needs the prepayment, and we can proceed." The prepayment. $68,000. A staggering sum, but one we had. My grandfather, a man who had loved Lily fiercely from the moment he met her, had set up a trust fund for this exact purpose before he died. It was Lily's fund, for Lily's heart. I walked down the long, white corridor to the finance office, my purse feeling heavy on my shoulder. I felt a sense of profound gratitude for my grandfather's foresight. He had made this possible. He was helping us save her. "I'm here to make a prepayment for Lily Myers's surgery," I told the clerk at the window. I handed her the account information for the trust. She typed the numbers into her computer, her fingers clicking on the keyboard. She frowned. She typed them again. "I'm sorry," she said, looking up at me with a confused expression. "There must be a mistake. This account, the balance is 0. The world stopped. The beeping of the monitors down the hall, the quiet chatter of the nurses, my own breath, it all just stopped. "What? That's not possible," I said, my voice a hoarse whisper. "There's $68,000 in that account. I checked the balance last week." "I've run it twice, ma'am," she said, her voice full of pity. "The entire amount was withdrawn yesterday morning. The account is empty." Empty. The word echoed in the sudden roaring silence in my head. I stumbled back out into the corridor, my hand pressed against my chest. There were only 2 other people who had access to that account. My parents. My mother, Susan, was a co-signer, a requirement my grandfather had put in place when I was younger. My hands shaking, I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and impatient. "What is it, Kate? I'm busy." "Mom," I said, my voice trembling. The money for Lily's surgery. It's gone. The bank said it was withdrawn yesterday." There was a pause. It was not a shocked pause. It was a cold, flat silence. "We needed it," she said finally, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "Your father and I had an investment opportunity. A sure thing. We needed the money more." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. The cruelty of it, the sheer monstrous selfishness, was suffocating. In the background, I heard my sister Claire's voice, bored and dismissive. "Oh, let it go," Claire sighed. "If she's destined to live, she will." The line went dead. I stood there in the middle of the hospital corridor, the phone still pressed to my ear. My daughter was in a room just feet away, her life hanging by a thread, and my family, my own mother and sister, had just gambled her life away on a sure thing. They had weighed my daughter's heart against a pile of money, and they had chosen the money. The pain was a physical thing, a white-hot agony that threatened to tear me apart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to collapse onto the cold linoleum floor and shatter into a million pieces. But then I thought of Lily. I thought of her bright smile, her brave little heart. She needed me. She needed her mother to be a fighter, not a victim. The grief didn't disappear. It just changed. It cooled, it hardened, it sharpened into a single, diamond-hard point of purpose. My hands stopped shaking. My breathing became even. I was no longer a heartbroken daughter or a terrified mother. I was an instrument of consequence. I scrolled through my contacts to a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't called in years. The number for Mr. Harrison, my grandfather's lawyer. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice as calm and as cold as ice. "It's Kate Myers. They did it. They took the money." I paused, then gave the order. It's time to invoke the fail-safe clause. To understand the fail-safe, you have to understand my grandfather. He was a man who had built his life on hard work, common sense, and a deep, abiding love for his family. But he was not a fool. He saw people for who they were, and that included his own children. My parents, Richard and Susan, have always been dreamers, but their dreams were not the kind that you build with hard work. They were the kind you hope to win in the lottery. They spent their lives chasing get-rich-quick schemes, pouring money into flimsy investment opportunities pitched by men in shiny suits. They were always one big score away from a life of luxury, and always one step away from financial ruin. My sister Claire was their golden child. They adored her. She was beautiful, charming, and had inherited their belief that the world owed them something. They paid for her expensive apartment, her designer clothes, her life of leisure, all while sinking deeper into debt. I was the responsible one, the boring one. I had a stable job as a grant writer for nonprofits. I was good with budgets and deadlines. I paid my bills on time. My stability was a constant, unspoken reproach to their chaos, and they resented me for it. They saw my careful planning not as a virtue, but as a lack of imagination. My grandfather saw it all. He loved his children, but he didn't trust them, especially not with money. When Lily was born and the doctors told us about her heart, my grandfather was the one who stood by us. While my own parents were offering vague, useless platitudes, my grandfather was taking action. He sat down with his financial advisor, Mr. Harrison, and created a plan. He set up a special trust fund, the Lily Myers Medical Trust. He funded it with a one-time deposit of $68,000, the estimated cost of the surgery she would one day need. The terms of the trust were crystal clear. The money was to be used for Lily's medical care and for nothing else. But there was a problem. I was young, just starting my career. My grandfather, in what was perhaps his only miscalculation, worried that I might be overwhelmed by managing such a large sum. So he made my parents, Richard and Susan, the official trustees of the account. They were the legal guardians of the money, the ones who had to sign off on any withdrawal. I was listed only as a beneficiary, along with Lily. It was a decision he came to regret. In the years that followed, my parents' financial situation grew more and more precarious. They started to see the trust fund not as a sacred promise to their granddaughter, but as a safety net for themselves. They began to borrow money from me. A few $100s here for a car repair, $1,000 there to cover a credit card bill. It was never paid back. Claire did the same, always with a new crisis, a new emergency that only I could solve. They were slowly draining my own savings, and I knew, with a growing sense of dread, that their eyes were on Lily's fund. I tried to get them removed as trustees. I went to Mr. Harrison, but he explained that the legal structure of the trust was ironclad. Only a serious breach of their duties could get them removed. Your grandfather trusted that their love for their granddaughter would be enough to ensure they did the right thing, Mr. Harrison had told me, his voice full of sadness. Let us pray he was right. He wasn't. Their final, disastrous investment was a scheme involving rare earth minerals. A charismatic con man had convinced them that for a one-time investment of $70,000, they would see a tenfold return in 6 months. They were desperate. They had exhausted all their other options. They had drained me dry. And so they looked at the account that held my daughter's future. They looked at the money that was meant to save her life, and they saw a solution to their own problems. They saw a lottery ticket. In their minds, they weren't stealing from their granddaughter. They were just borrowing it. They were so sure their ship was finally coming in that they would have the money back, and more, long before Lily ever needed it. But Lily's heart didn't wait. The call from the surgeon came 2 months later. It was time, and the money was gone. They had made their choice. They had breached their duties in the most catastrophic way imaginable, and in doing so, they had just sprung a trap my grandfather had set for them years ago. My grandfather knew his children. He knew their weaknesses, their greed, their endless capacity for self-deception. He knew that one day, their desperation might overwhelm their love for their own family, and so, with Mr. Harrison's help, he had built a fail-safe, a final, hidden clause in his will designed to protect the one thing he cherished most, his great-granddaughter's future. The $68,000 in the medical trust was only a part of the plan. It was the liquid asset, the bait in the trap. The real value, the true heart of my grandfather's legacy, was the family home. It was a beautiful, sprawling house in the city's most desirable neighborhood, a place my parents had lived in for 40 years. It was the house I grew up in. To them, it was their castle, a symbol of their status, the one solid asset they had left in a life built on shifting financial sand. They believed it was theirs, passed down to them, untouchable. They were wrong. Years ago, when my parents' debts first started to spiral out of control, my grandfather had taken a drastic step to protect the house from their creditors. He had legally transferred the ownership of the house itself into a separate, irrevocable trust, the same trust that would one day contain Lily's medical fund. He then granted his children, Richard and Susan, the right to live in the house for the remainder of their lifetimes. It was a generous gift. They could live there rent-free, secure in the knowledge that no matter how bad their debts got, they would always have a roof over their heads. The house was protected, but the gift came with one critical condition, a condition buried deep in the legal jargon of the trust agreement. Mr. Harrison called it the fail-safe clause. The clause stated that their right to live in the house, their life estate, was entirely dependent on them fulfilling their duties as trustees for any and all beneficiaries of the trust. The primary duty, the most sacred one, was the protection and proper management of the Lily Myers Medical Trust. The theft of the $68,000 was not just a cruel act of selfishness, it was a catastrophic, undeniable breach of their fiduciary duties. It was the legal equivalent of pushing a giant red button. And when I made that phone call to Mr. Harrison from the hospital corridor, I was giving him the order to push it. "Are you absolutely certain, Kate?" he had asked, his voice grim but steady. "You know what this means. There is no going back." "They left my daughter's life to destiny." "Mr. Harrison," I had replied, my voice cold as stone, "I am simply returning the favor to their home. Invoke the clause." The legal mechanism was swift and brutal. The moment they breached their duties as trustees, the fail-safe clause was triggered. Their right to live in the house was immediately and automatically terminated. It was as if their lease had expired. And the ownership of the house? It didn't go to a bank. It didn't go into a long, messy legal battle. According to the precise, brilliant terms my grandfather had laid out, the ownership of the house was immediately transferred to the trust's sole remaining beneficiary, my daughter, Lily. My parents thought they were stealing from their granddaughter to save themselves. In reality, they had just handed her the keys to their kingdom. They had traded their home, their security, their entire world for a lottery ticket that had already been thrown in the trash. They had no idea. As they were at the bank, trying to access the money they had stolen, they were living on borrowed time. They were sitting in a house that no longer belonged to them. They believed they had committed the perfect crime, taking money they thought no one would need for months. They didn't know that my grandfather's love was a fortress, and they had just detonated the bomb he had built into its very foundations. The consequences were no longer a matter of if, but when. And when was just a few hours away. While I was in a small, quiet room at the hospital, signing papers to have Lily's surgery covered by the hospital's emergency charity fund, the first domino fell. My parents, Richard and Susan, along with my sister Claire, were at their bank. They were feeling triumphant. They had the money, a solution to all their problems. They were at the teller's window, ready to make a wire transfer to the investment firm that had promised them the world. It was the final step in their brilliant plan. The teller typed in the account numbers. She frowned. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice professionally flat. "This transaction has been flagged. The account has been frozen pending a review." My father, I imagine, would have puffed out his chest, ready to deliver a lecture on customer service. My mother would have looked annoyed, as if this were a personal inconvenience designed to ruin her day. Claire would have rolled her eyes, bored. "Frozen?" my father would have boomed. "On what grounds? That is our money." But before the teller could answer, my father's phone rang. He would have glanced at the screen, seen it was the bank's mortgage department, and answered with an irritated huff. "Richard speaking." The voice on the other end would have been calm, professional, and utterly devastating. It would have informed him that due to a severe breach of the trust agreement governing his property, his life estate had been terminated. The ownership of the house at 12 Oakwood Lane had been legally transferred to a new owner. An eviction notice was being drawn up by their legal team and would be served by a court officer that very afternoon. He would have stood there, in the middle of the bank lobby, the phone pressed to his ear, the world tilting on its axis, the house, their house, gone. At the same moment, a notification would have pinged on my sister's phone. It would be an alert from her own bank. Claire, who lived a life far beyond her means, had used her parents' house as collateral to secure a loan for her brand-new luxury car. It was a foolish, risky move, but she had been so sure of her inheritance, so certain of the house's value. The message would have been short and brutal. "Dear Ms. Myers, we have been notified that the collateral securing your auto loan is no longer valid. Your loan is now in default. The full balance is due immediately. Failure to pay will result in the immediate repossession of your vehicle." The car, her prized possession, the symbol of the glamorous life she pretended to have. Gone. The chaos would have erupted right there in the bank. My father sputtering, disbelieving, my mother, her face turning a pasty white, and Claire letting out a shriek of pure, selfish rage. They would have started arguing, blaming each other, their perfect, triumphant morning collapsing into a nightmare of recrimination and panic. They had walked into that bank feeling like winners, like masterminds who had outsmarted the system. They were about to pay off their debts, get their big score, and put all their troubles behind them. But my grandfather's plan was a quiet, patient thing. It had waited for years. It had let them get comfortable. It had let them believe they were in control. And then, in the space of a single phone call and a single text message, it had pulled the rug out from under their entire world. They had stolen $68,000 from a sick child, and in doing so they had lost everything: their home, their credit, their car, their future. They were standing in the rubble of their own lives, and they had no one to blame but themselves. Their first thought, I knew, would not be of Lily. It would not be of the granddaughter whose life they had gambled away. It would be of me. They would come for me, furious, demanding that I fix the mess they had made, and I would be waiting. They found me in the surgical waiting room on the 4th floor. It was a small, grim space with uncomfortable chairs and old magazines. I was sitting alone, staring at the clock on the wall, each tick a slow, agonizing beat counting the seconds my daughter's heart was in someone else's hands. The hospital's charity board had been incredible, pushing through the emergency funding after I showed them the trust documents and the empty account. Lily was in surgery. She was being taken care of. But my own heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. The doors to the waiting room burst open and they stormed in. My father, my mother, and Claire. They didn't look like a family coming to support a loved one. They looked like a pack of wolves, their faces twisted with rage and panic. They ignored the other anxious families in the room. They marched straight towards me. "Kate," my father boomed, his voice echoing in the quiet space. "What have you done? You need to call off your lawyers right now. They're trying to evict us from our own home." My mother was right behind him, her face blotchy with tears of self-pity. "How could you do this to me, Kate? To your own mother? I'll be out on the street. Is that what you want? To see me homeless?" Claire stood behind them, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of pure venom. "And my car," she hissed. "They're going to take my car. This is all your fault. You and your stupid, sick kid." The words hit me, but they didn't have the power they once did. I looked at them, at their frantic, selfish faces. They weren't asking about Lily. They hadn't called once to see if the surgery had even started. They weren't here because they were worried about their granddaughter. They were here because their money, their house, and their car were gone. A profound, weary calm settled over me. I had no more anger left, just a vast, empty space where my love for them used to be. I stood up slowly. I was not the daughter they knew. I was not the sister they could bully. I was a mother whose child was fighting for her life, and I had no time for their nonsense. My stupid, sick kid is in that operating room right now, I said, my voice quiet but carrying a weight that made them all fall silent. Her heart is stopped while a team of doctors tries to save the life you three decided wasn't worth $68,000. I looked at my mother. You won't be homeless, Mom. You'll be in a small apartment, one you can afford. It's called living within your means. You should try it sometime. I turned to my father. It was never your home, Dad. It was grandfather's, and he gave it to Lily. You were just house-sitting. Then I looked at my sister. And your car, Claire? That's between you and the bank. You used a 6-year-old's medical fund as collateral. You gambled. You lost. They stared at me, stunned into silence by this new, cold version of me. You made your choice, I said, my voice final. You chose money over family. You chose a get-rich-quick scheme over your granddaughter's life. These are not my actions. These are the consequences of yours. Now, get out. You can't talk to us like that, my father sputtered, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. He took a step towards me, his hand raised, and in that moment, something shifted in my husband. Daniel, who had been standing silently by the door, suddenly moved. He stepped between me and my father, his body a solid protective wall. She said, "Get out," Daniel said, his voice low and shaking but firm. It was the first time in his life he had ever stood up to them. Don't you ever come near my wife or my daughter again. Now, get out. My family looked at him shocked. They had lost their hold on him. They had lost their power. Defeated, they turned and shuffled out of the waiting room, a trio of bitter, broken people. Daniel turned to me, his eyes full of a pain and regret that mirrored my own. He wrapped his arms around me, and for the first time that day, I let myself lean on him. We stood there in the middle of the grim waiting room, two parents waiting for their child's heart to start beating again, alone, but finally, truly, together. The days that followed were a blur of hospital corridors, beeping machines, and the constant metallic smell of antiseptic. My world shrank to the size of Lily's hospital room. Nothing else mattered. The drama with my family, the house, the money, it was all just distant noise. My only focus was the small, sleeping girl in the bed, the steady rise and fall of her chest, and the rhythmic, stronger beep of the heart monitor. But while my world had shrunk, the world of my parents and sister was collapsing in on itself. Mr. Harrison, true to his word, was relentless. He kept me updated with brief, factual emails that I would read on my phone in the dead of night, sitting by Lily's bedside. The first email confirmed that the investment was a complete scam. The charismatic man with the shiny suit had vanished, along with the $68,000. The money was gone, laundered through a series of offshore accounts, completely untraceable. They had traded their entire world for nothing. The second email detailed the eviction. They had tried to fight it, of course. My father had hired a cheap lawyer who had blustered about illegal seizure of property. Mr. Harrison had simply presented the trust agreement signed by my grandfather and my parents, with the fail-safe clause highlighted. The judge had taken one look at it and dismissed their case in under 5 minutes. The eviction was to proceed. Claire's car was the next to go. The repossession company showed up at her apartment building in the middle of the night. She had apparently made a scene, screaming and crying on the sidewalk as they towed away her precious luxury sedan. Her symbol of a life she had never earned was gone. The lawsuit Mr. Harrison filed against them was the final crushing blow. It was for theft, breach of fiduciary duty, and emotional distress. He wasn't just coming after the money they had stolen, he was coming after everything they had left. They were forced to declare bankruptcy. The public notice in the newspaper was a deep and lasting humiliation for a family so obsessed with their social standing. They had to sell everything of value: my mother's jewelry, my father's collection of antique watches, the expensive furniture that had filled their home. All of it sold for pennies on the dollar to pay their legal fees and mounting debts. They ended up in a tiny two-bedroom apartment in a rundown part of the city I had never even been to. The grand estate with its manicured lawns was replaced by a cramped space with peeling paint and a view of a brick wall. My mother, who had once hosted lavish dinner parties, was now learning how to cook on a hot plate. My father, who had seen himself as a titan of industry in waiting, was now trying to find a job at the age of 65 with a resume full of failed schemes. Claire had to move in with them. Without her car and with her credit cards maxed out, she couldn't afford her own apartment anymore. The three of them, who had been so united in their cruelty and arrogance, were now trapped together in a small, miserable space, their bitterness and resentment turning inward on each other. I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, no joy in their downfall. Their new life was simply a fact, a direct and unavoidable consequence of a choice they had made. They had looked at my daughter's life, at her very heartbeat, and decided it was worth less than a risky investment. They had gambled, and the universe had called their bluff. One evening, sitting in the quiet hospital room, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was from Claire. "I hope you're happy, Kate. You've destroyed us." I looked at the message, then I looked at my daughter, sleeping peacefully. Her breath coming easy and even for the first time in her life. The doctors said she was healing beautifully, that her new, mended heart was strong. I thought about what it meant to be destroyed. Was it losing a house, a car, money? Or was it looking at a child, your own flesh and blood, and deciding her life was a risk you were willing to take? I deleted the message without replying. I had not destroyed them. They had destroyed themselves. I was just the one who had finally sent them the bill. 2 weeks after the surgery, Lily came home. She was still pale and moved slowly, but she was different. The faint blue tinge that had always colored her lips was gone, replaced by a healthy rosy pink. Her breathing, which had always been a little too shallow, a little too fast, was now deep and even. For the first time, she could run up the stairs without getting winded. She could laugh without starting to cough. She was a new child, reborn with a heart that was whole. The money from the sale of my parents' house, which was legally Lily's house, was more than enough to cover the surgery and all the follow-up care. As per my grandfather's trust, Mr. Harrison placed the remaining funds, a considerable sum, into a new, ironclad trust. This one had only 2 names on it: Lily Myers, beneficiary, and Kate Myers, trustee. Her future was secure, protected by a fortress of legal firewalls that no one could ever breach again. My old family, my parents, my sister, disappeared from my life. They made no further attempts to contact me. I heard through a distant cousin that they were struggling, that the bitterness of their new, small life had poisoned their relationships with each other. They were trapped in a prison of their own making, and I felt nothing but a profound, quiet relief. They were a chapter of my life that was finally, blessedly, over. My new family, the real one, grew stronger. Daniel, having finally stood up to his mother, had found a new strength, a new backbone. The guilt he felt over his years of passive complicity was immense, but he channeled it into becoming the husband and father he had always wanted to be. He was my rock, my partner in a way he had never been before. He was there for every doctor's appointment, every late-night worry. He was present. The final scene of our story unfolded on a bright, sunny afternoon 3 months after the surgery. We were in our backyard. Lily, who had once been a quiet, cautious child, was running. She was chasing a soccer ball, her laughter echoing in the clear air, her face flushed with exertion and pure joy. She was a whirlwind of energy, a blur of motion. I was sitting on the porch steps, a sketchbook in my lap. I wasn't drawing, I was just watching her, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. Daniel came and sat beside me, handing me a cup of tea. He put his arm around my shoulders, and we watched our daughter together. "Look at her go," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I never thought I'd see that." "I know," I whispered. Lily, seeing us watching, stopped and grinned. "Mommy, Daddy, watch this." She kicked the ball with all her might. It sailed through the air and landed perfectly in the small goal we had set up. "Goal!" she screamed, throwing her arms up in triumph. In that moment, I thought about the phrase my sister had used, the words that had ignited the firestorm. If she's destined to live, she will. Claire had meant it as a justification for her cruelty, a way to absolve herself of responsibility, but she was, in a way, right. Lily was destined to live. She was destined to run and laugh and score goals in the bright afternoon sun. Her destiny was not a matter of chance or fate. It was a matter of love. It was the love of a grandfather who had planned for her future. It was the love of a team of doctors who had mended her heart. It was the love of a father who had finally found his courage. And it was the fierce, unending, absolute love of a mother who would burn down the world to protect her child. Lily ran over to us, her cheeks red, her eyes sparkling. She threw her arms around my neck. "I love you." "Mommy," she said, her breath warm against my cheek. I held her tight, breathing in the scent of grass and sunshine. I felt the steady, strong beat of her heart against my own. Thump, 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 thump. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. "I love you too, my sweet girl," I said, "more than anything." My old family was gone, their world in ashes. But I had everything I had ever needed, right here in my arms. A new heart, a new life, a new beginning. We were whole. We were home.